Imagine if people of different ideas could actually have a conversation, not for the purpose of compromise, not for the purpose of kumbaya, but for the goal of understanding why people that are different than us are actually different than us. Welcome back, amazing people, to episode 69 of The Hopeful Majority. Now, last week was the anniversary of October 7th, which was the terrible tragedy that occurred in the Middle East and Israel. And importantly, college campuses have been in the news all over again. And people are asking themselves, can college students actually discuss Israel-Palestine on our college campuses? And that's the question that we're going to wade into today. Yes, a difficult question, a painful question, a question that evokes a lot of emotions. And yet, I've got some facts for you, some reality for you that runs counter to what you might be seeing in the news, what we might be hearing in the media. I've got a reality for you about the possibility for civic dialogue that we do not see, because importantly, it is up to us to elevate the story of the hopeful majority of people that are having these constructive discussions, the courageous discussions in the face of a lot of conflict. So, with that, let's get into this conversation. I'm going to see you on the other side. Can college students actually discuss Israel Palestine on our college campuses? The very difficult, very painful, very emotionally driven topic, rightfully so, for many people across the political spectrum. Now, if you hear my voice and it's a little odd, it's because I'm actually a little sick. I'm on the road right now visiting many of our college chapters across the country. College chapters of what? The organization that I help lead, Bridge USA. You may have seen this on many other episodes. You can go to episode 2 or 3 to get a refresher on what Bridge USA actually is. But essentially, it's an organization that empowers young people to bridge divides, hold discussions on colleges and high schools. It's all student led because here's the kicker. Here's the fact. We think that most people in the country, most people in our colleges, most people in our high schools, most people are just interested in the possibility for dialogue. Most people want to listen to each other, to hear each other, to understand why people that are different than us actually disagree. We have a bold bet, and that bet is, imagine if people of different ideas could actually have a conversation, not for the purpose of compromise, not for the purpose of kumbaya, but for the goal of understanding why people that are different than us are actually different than us. Because our thought is that gets us to progress. So, how does all this relate to Israel Palestine? Well, I'm going to share a couple of facts with you. And these facts run counter to what we see out there in the news. Fact number one: since the terrible events of October 7th, 28 of our college chapters have hosted discussions featuring students from across the political spectrum that have gone incredibly productive and well on college campuses. 28 dialogues. Fact number two: in these 28 dialogues, we've had approximately 599 students participate, representing various views, various ethnicities, various demographics, trying to tackle a very difficult, abrasive, and I think at some points painful topic, right? Fact number three: during these conversations, we have yet to see one event go upside down. We have yet to see massive discord in an event. Yes, there have been flare ups. Yes, there have been tensions. And yet, what we aren't seeing is what we see in the media, which is constant protest, constant violence, and unfortunately, people meeting difference with violence as opposed to dialogue. Why is that? Why is it that these three facts run counter to what we are seeing? Because if you follow these three facts, the logical answer to the question, can students, can administrators, can faculty actually have these productive discussions about Israel Palestine? The answer to that question is most likely yes. So, why? Three reasons. Reason number one: the problem on college campuses is not a problem of polarization, it's a problem of fear. Not a problem of polarization, but a problem of fear. What do we mean by that? In April, in early May, we had protests across the college campuses that we're seeing. And we asked our chapter leaders from USC, UC Berkeley, NYU, Columbia, UT Austin, the campuses that were experiencing the protests. We said, tell us, what are you seeing on the ground? And one of the realities that came to fore very quickly was that, yes, while we saw a loud minority of voices dominating the conversation, protesting, being very vocal across both sides of the issue, a majority of students were open to having the conversation and yet were scared to. A majority of the faculty believed that to resolve our very divisive disagreements, we have to be able to listen to each other. And yet, we didn't see that. Administrators across the country believe, college presidents believe that we need to be able to hold these conversations, if not for a college campus, then where? So you've got a majority of people believe in a certain asset, a principle, and yet we're not seeing these dialogues happening across the country. We only see conflict and protest. And this is not about negating conflict and protest. It's about trying to understand, why can't we meet our difference with conversation and dialogue, cooperation instead of conflict? Why is that? And so what we very quickly realized was that the majority of people in the country, the majority of people on college campuses, while they want to have the conversation, they're scared to. Yes, we're divided. We've always been divided, but division is not the reason why we can't have a culture of pluralism and open-minded conversation. Fear is. And so, how do you smash a culture of fear? You smash a culture of fear by empowering the majority of people that are trapped in that fear and showing them that everyone else around you also believes what you think. It's to recognize that the reality of our challenge is not the majority of people being incredibly divided, but a vocal minority of people that have co opted the microphone. They've co opted the political battle space. You feel me? You hear what I'm saying? It's that the narrative of these 28 discussions that happened across our chapters, the 599 students have had very productive discussions. They've had them because they have stood courageously in the face of conflict to say, at this point, when everybody else is telling us we cannot have the conversation, we will. It's a culture of fear, not a culture of division. And when you can start to understand that the culture of fear, nervousness about what you might say, how you might say, might trap, might push on people's toes, a nervousness that what you might say might not come out right. How can we have a democracy if people cannot show up authentically and vulnerably to the town square? And that's what these Bridge USA chapter leaders are doing across the country. It's time to break that culture of fear. Reason number two, it's that these communities of Bridge USA students are driven by a culture of trust and friendship, a culture of trust and friendship. Imagine I told you that you had two populations of students that have not really interacted ever, and then suddenly their two ethnic countries slash nation states go to conflict and war. Of course, their identities are going to come into conflict because there's never been real interaction or social contact. There's never been a development of trust and cooperation. And in the context of Israel-Palestine, oftentimes you'll see on campuses that you rarely have interaction between these two different student groups. And in fact, broadly, forget these two student groups, across the board, with the rise of identity-based student organizations, ironically, at a time of increased diversity, you see less cooperation. So what Bridge USA chapter students are doing is they're saying, we're going to create these spaces of cooperation, of listening, of trust, where you will actually be able to develop a friendship with somebody you disagree with. Shocker idea, I know. And we're actually going to listen to each other. And through this friendship, what happens is that when our identities do come into conflict, our relationship with each other is actually able to trump our disagreement over an issue. It's like the family. How many of us have families out there where we have conflict and issues? I'm almost certain it's all of us. I've yet to find a family that is pristine. And yet families persist. Why is that? Because there's relationships that tie and undergird the conflict. We have to be able to have these conversations, but importantly, have them in productive, trust-based communities where people can actually hear each other. We've got to build these communities before the conflict and the shit actually hits the fan, right? That is especially important at this moment. Reason number three, dialogue and deliberation at this time is perceived as in conflict with protest. When I show up to a college campus and we talk to people and they hear us saying we should have more civic dialogue and cooperation, what they immediately assume is saying we're being critical of protests. And so the students that are protesting believe that the dialogue is a threat to their operation. And that's not true. Democracy is a puzzle. Democracy is a puzzle with many different pieces. Imagine I asked you that you were holding a knife, a fork, and a spoon. And I asked you, what is the most important utensil? You'd probably say, depends on the context. Just like you got the knife, the fork, and the spoon, you've got protest, active listening, and dialogue. And imagine I asked you, which one is the most important? That's the wrong question. The real question is what is needed at this moment? And I believe our students believe, and we're seeing across the country, I think most people believe that instead of conflict, we need cooperation and conversation. Because when a society is incredibly polarized, where our media bubbles are causing us to feed certain amounts of information, when our echo chambers are growing, when our inability to actually hear and see each other because we're trapped in our own communities is rising, the way to advance your idea is not to beat the other side over the head with your idea, but it's to approach them with the open hand. It's to say, hey, I've got a shocking idea. Let's actually listen to each other and hear what we might actually say. So, increased dialogue, increased conversation actually supplements across the board. Uh, I don't know why we live at this moment where people say that the only way to create change is protest. I don't know why we live at this moment where people say the only way to create change is to listen to people you disagree with. Maybe it's all of the above. In the 60s, protest was an incredibly effective tactic. And you know what else was incredibly effective? Martin Luther King's tactic of agape love. This idea that you have to meet people that are different than us with a conception of being able to understand why they disagree with us. You need both. And on a college campus, people think that you either have the conversation or you pick up the sign. And that's wrong. That's just wrong because it leads us down the wrong path. So we've had 28 dialogues, 599 students all discuss very productively in some very tense environments the very divisive issue of Israel-Palestine. So the answer to the question, can students actually discuss this issue, is absolutely yes. But the way in which we do it has got to be productive, effective, and it's got to be supported. Colleges can have the conversation. The question is not how. The question is whether or not we're willing and courageous enough to actually execute. That's essential. And so finally, you might be asking, well, why even talk about this issue? What's the point of dialogue? What does that get us? What have the last 12 months shown us? Is that not enough evidence? I the amount of times we've come across this argument that maybe conversation is not necessary. Well, here's the thing. If we believe that the people we disagree with are fundamentally evil, if you believe that, then technically you're justified to execute on that will in however you may do. And the problem is that in a democracy, this amazing system we've got that has its challenges, that has its problems, but as Churchill said, is the least worst form of government, best worst form of government, is that we have to live with people that we disagree with, not because we have to, but because it actually leads to more productive solutions, a marketplace of ideas, a place where people of various different identities can engage. That is awesome. That is fantastic. We don't live in a zero sum world. And that is why we need dialogue. We need conversation because understanding the other side, not compromising our values, but understanding the other side is step one to putting an end to this notion that people that disagree with us are fundamentally evil. And if on a college campus we can't have that conversation, where else? For anybody that's new seeing this episode, every Monday, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your content, we do interview conversations. Next week, we'll actually have on a fascinating guest in Frances Haugen, who is the Facebook whistleblower. This week, we just did a monologue. Every week, we change it up because we're building this hopeful majority of people that want to listen to each other and disagree and better understand people of different ideas. Because if we don't have that, then what do we got? I'll see you next week, friends.